Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to my UFC Philadelphia reaction slash review video. The card just ended about 4 or 5 hours ago, and I'm just gonna get down to it and run through the main card, give my thoughts on what happened and what could be up next for the fighters moving forward, in my opinion. So let's just jump right into it. First of all, this was the second formal UFC on ESPN card, in terms of the ones that are actually broadcast on cable TV. So I thought it was a very, so they had to hit this one out of the park, in my opinion. And I think for the most part, they kind of did, particularly with the main event, which we're going to get to. Justin Gaethje knocks out Edson Barboza in 2 minutes and 30 seconds into the first round of their encounter. Uh, it was an unbelievable 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Just heavenly violence all around. He backed him, Gaethje backed up Barbosa going up against the fence and caught him as he was circling with an overhand right hook, knocked him flat, and then the ref stepped in and stopped it. Just absolutely stirring knockout, fantastic stuff. Kind of reminded me of Dan Henderson, Michael Bisping from UFC 100 10 years ago, which is, yeah, I can't believe that's been 10 years ago. Uh, it was just, it was unbelievable. Justin Gaethje, if he has, coming up from WSOF as a former lightweight champion there, you saw that he had the talent and that he was probably more than likely, one of the best lightweights in the world. We just wanted to see him prove it against competition we felt was worthy of his skill set. And like I said, if he hadn't been at that point, he certainly proved it now. He's now, I believe, 3-2 in the UFC. Uh, After he won his debut against Michael Johnson, that legendary Fight of the Year candidate from a year and a half back, if not 2 years ago. Goodness gracious, how long has it been since he debuted? He's already been in the UFC this long. After like a year, right? Yeah, something like that. And then he had a setback, losing back-to-back fights to Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier, which, of course, not too shabby. You could find worse people to lose to in consecutive fights than Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez, a former UFC champ, and then the other potentially becoming the next UFC champ. So he remedied that by knocking out James Vick and now Edson Barbosa in consecutive main event fights. And in my opinion, the sky's the limit now. He has positioned himself for basically any fight in the lightweight division that you can think of. I mean, you can fight for the title. In my opinion, I know that Dustin Poirier is fighting Max Holloway for the interim lightweight championship, but depending on how that shakes out, particularly if Max Holloway wins, I think Dustin, Justin Gaethje is the next. You could slide him right in there and have him fight Max Holloway, or if not, he can fight Tony Ferguson once Tony Ferguson, as of this recording, if I'm not mistaken, is still going through his personal stuff. I mean, he put some stuff out on Twitter that that hints that he's gonna be all right and that he's figuring this out and he's gonna get his life together and then come back to fighting. Personally, in my opinion, I think just he should 100% focus on getting everything as right as possible before he comes back. Just all this stuff is secondary to his health. So, but as we were saying, if he is ready to go really soon, Justin Gaethje, who wouldn't want to see that? Or Cowboy Cerrone, who's now returning to the lightweight division from welterweight and wants to make a run at the title, who Justin Gaethje actually noted in his post-fight interview as being upset that he got skipped over for Cowboy. Like, Cowboy got ranked above him just by coming back, even though he didn't fight him yet. So you wouldn't want to see that either. And then, of course, there's always the specter that is Conor McGregor. Let's be honest. Conor McGregor may be coming off a loss to Nurmagomedov, and he hasn't won a fight since he beat Eddie Alvarez to become the double champ. But the fact of the matter is, he is still the biggest money fight in the lightweight division, bar none. And who wouldn't, as I said, Who wouldn't want to see Justin Gaethje fight Conor McGregor? I mean, that's that's the epitome of shut up and take my money, right? And then of course, as we've mentioned, the lightweight championship. Now the tough thing is with Khabib Nurmagomedov, when you add in his issues after UFC 229 with the near riot that he incited by attacking Dylan Dennis, and the suspension that came after that, which may be over now, but nevertheless, and then coupled with his own personal practices in that he observes Ramadan, the Muslim holiday. He's not going to fight until earliest September, middle September, maybe early October. So, Justin Gaethje is going to have to be kept busy, right? So, Justin Gaethje's got to fight somebody. So we'll see how that shakes out moving forward. As for Edson Barbosa, he finds himself in this really weird, tough spot where he now is basically the gatekeeper of the lightweight division, which really bothers me because I don't feel that he's, to be a gatekeeper, somebody that'll never really get to the title or win it, but will always be hovering around it and just, knocking off contenders or being the person that contenders beat in order to ascend to the title. I still think he's not only a viable contender, I still think he has championship material, given his fighting style and his resume. I mean, the guy is 20-7 overall in his career after tonight, with suffering his seventh loss, which were all in the UFC, by the way, all against legitimate competition. And most of those guys, 5 of them, definitely, when you consider, who are elite. I mean, we're talking Khabib Nurmagomedov. We're talking Tony Ferguson. The guy is not losing to subpar talent. And then we're not even talking about his first loss that he had suffered all those years ago. He lost to Jamie Varner, who was a former WEC champ. So, Edson Barbosa is just one of those things where it's almost like the Michael Bisping thing, where Michael Bisping was always a perennial top 10, top 5 guy, but he just never could get over the hump, but he eventually won the title. So, with Edson Barbosa, I feel he's good enough to knock off everyone below him, and I think if the opportunity presents itself, he could still win the title. So, as of right now, unfortunately, the trajectory that he's on is that he now needs to stay above water. Hypothetically speaking, he's only won one fight in his last 4, which was a win over Dan Hooker, who, as aforementioned, was like a fringe top 15 guy, a talented one, but a fringe guy. He was losing to but that's to juxtapose who he was fighting before, losing to elites like Kevin Lee. Edson Barbosa's back down to that where he's got to fight, somebody around the bottom of the top 15, which I think maybe he should get Alex Hernandez next. The kid that fought Cowboy Cerrone most recently and lost. I think that would be a good litmus test fight for both Alex Hernandez and Edson Barbosa, both for Edson to try to maintain his spot in the top 10 and for Alex Hernandez to try to see if he legitimately belongs in the upper echelon of the lightweight class. So that's my observation for the main event. In the co-main event, we had in the middleweight division, the veteran WSOF 2-division champ David Branch was upset by Jack Hermanson. He got submitted in less than a minute with a guillotine choke. This was a stunning development in my opinion because Dave Branch is a legit veteran of the sport. He's got over 20 fights. This was his second stint in the UFC. He's only been suffering losses to fairly good competition. This is now his second consecutive loss after being stopped by Jared Cannonier, who is now fighting Anderson Silva, by the way. It's a tough loss for David Branch, particularly having returned to the UFC coming out of a 11 fight winning streak in WSOF, where he went undefeated there. He lost to Luke Rockhold, and which is a very interesting thing. His only win in the last few fights has been Thiago Santos, who is now at light heavyweight and will get a title shot at John Jones more than likely if it hasn't been confirmed already. Uh, and Jack Hermanson also lost to Thiago Santos at middleweight. So it's kind of interesting how they both have common opponents. One has a win over him, the other is a loss. So that leads me to what I was going to say about Jack Hermanson is Jack Hermanson's probably now an underrated middleweight. He needs a ranking now. He has a sneaky good record in the UFC. He's above 500. And, he probably should get a ranking now. He probably should get another. David Branch's biggest win to date. And, he clearly needs to get a step up in competition to see if it's not just one of those fluke occurrences where he's just, more of an indictment on David Branch than it is an affirmation of who Jack Hermanson is. So I think what's next for Jack Hermanson was I'm not really sure exactly who he should get. Because David Branch was his biggest step up in competition to date, and there's the fluctuation at middleweight where you got some guys moving up, like Luke Rockhold moving to light heavyweight. So it kind of really opens up the division from that perspective. About Jack Hermanson could find himself well high up in the top 15, just outside the top 10 perhaps. And as for David Branch, moving back to him, is because of his ranking, he's number 11th guy. I think he warrants another decent fight in the division to get himself in the top 10. So I would probably like to see him against either possibly the loser of the Yoel Romero Jacare Souza fight. I think that makes a lot of sense because given the age of the three, they're both around the same age, and their resumes speak for themselves. They're both all talented grapplers, so I think that would make sense for David Branch to get the loser of that fight. So yeah, I think that would be a good next progressive fight for David Branch. And moving right along to, in my opinion, the most sense is one of my featured fights on the main card. I think for everybody that was tuning in the strawweight division, Michelle Waterson fought former title challenger Karolina Kowalkiewicz and defeated her via unanimous decision. It was one of Michelle Waterson's best complete performances, which we're talking like she had a big win over Paige Van Zandt not too long ago. Very well-rounded performance, established control, took down Karolina several times, and established top control, and just showed well-roundedness that we knew she was capable of, and she has now placed herself in a very, very good position to possibly fight for the title or at least not at minimum get a title eliminator bout against the winner of Tatiana Suarez and Nina Ansaroff. So, she called for a title shot in her post-fight interview, and as much as I like to see that, which I think wouldn't be the worst thing, I think the best scenario would be to, as I said, get a title eliminator bout against either Nina Ansaroff or Tatiana Suarez, or at the very least fight another strawweight that is parallel to her, that she hasn't fought yet, that is trying to come up, like maybe a Cynthia Calvillo or something like that. You know what I mean? So what I don't want to see her fight right now, though, is Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Not because I didn't think that would. It's just not that wouldn't be a good fight. It's just that Joanna Jędrzejczyk is coming back down to strawweight after losing her bid for the flyweight championship, and she clearly has aspirations still to get the title. I hate to see Michelle Waterson get stunted in that perspective, because given who the champ is, Rose Namajunas, if Jędrzejczyk were to beat her, then that stunts the growth of Michelle Waterson when you really didn't need to right away, So I think that, it'll be interesting to see the match booking at the UFC, because I have a sneaky feeling they want to book that fight because they want to put Michelle Waterson in the most highest profile bout possible. They clearly want her to be a star, and they want her to be at least get a championship shot. to be in that spotlight. So I'll be curious to see who she gets booked next, because it's just weird shuffling the strawweight division because some strawweights are moving up to flyweight and such. So that'll be interesting moving forward. As for Karolina Kowalkiewicz, as I was speaking about with Edson Barbosa, she now finds herself in a very similar situation in that she could possibly be her potentially her title aspirations could be behind her, and she's just now a gatekeeper. And I don't agree with that. I like with Edson. I still feel that she is more than capable of becoming the champion. It's just she's catching a few bad breaks, losing to other contenders that move ahead of her. She gave Joanna Jędrzejczyk a solid fight when she had her title shot. She lost that bout, and she lost that bout unanimous decision. But I thought it was, she competed really well in that fight, and she showed that she had the mettle to go hang with someone as good as Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But unfortunately, she's now on a 2-fight skid, having been stopped by Jessica Andrade in the previous fight. So I think now what's going to happen is, once again, like with Edson Barbosa, I think Carolina will get booked against a fringe top 15 opponent. Just it's not a tune. I wouldn't call it a tune-up fight, but it's definitely a fight that positions her to possibly get her confidence back, because you don't want to see her start losing multiple fights in the top 10, because then she'll just be completely wasted out of the top 10. So I think the safe bet would be to just book her against an up and comer that's breaking into the top 15, to really give that person a litmus test to see where they belong in the division. So I think that would be the right call, for somebody of Carolina's caliber. So that way she can get a win under her belt, or potentially, of course. I'm not saying that she will, but that it's one of those things where she needs it for her confidence. So, and now moving on to the last couple of fights on the main card. Most of these are prospect development fights. You had Paul Craig defeat Kennedy Nzechukwu. I apologize if I butchered that name. This was a light heavyweight bout. Paul Craig secured a triangle choke submission victory late in the third round, which is becoming a habit of his now. These miracle come from behind victories in which he bouts that he was clearly losing. Kennedy, who is a alum, so to speak, of the Dana White Contender Series, he's making his UFC debut. He's 6'5", 83-inch reach. Clearly looks like he has the physical tools to be a threat in the light heavyweight division, but his UFC debut was wasn't the most ideal. He got a point taken away from him for various infractions. He accidentally poked Paul Craig in the eye. He was grabbing the fence a couple of times. But he did show some promise early. He was hitting him with decent strikes to the side. He was doing the elbows, trying to stop the takedowns of Paul Craig. But then ultimately Paul Craig kept hanging in there with his takedowns and eventually got the submission. His persistence paid off. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward. Paul Craig, of course, was trying to keep his head above water. He was likely facing a pink slip if he lost this bout, because I believe he's on a couple of fight losing skid. Now I think he just moved himself back into 500 in the UFC, if I'm not mistaken, now with this victory. So always good to see that. So we'll see when he gets booked in. He'll probably get booked in a similar, trajectory, fighting somebody in the middle of the pack in the division. As for Kennedy, clearly not the most auspicious way to start your UFC career, but at the same time, he's still young enough where he will clearly get progressed along, and he'll get his opportunities to prove himself in the UFC. And now in the final fight of the main card, final as in the one that kicked off the main card, Super Sadiq Youssef defeated WSOF vet Shaman Moraes by unanimous decision. This was a solid performance from Youssef, establishing good striking skills, winning his pocket exchanges and things like that. In his post-fight call-out, he proceeded to call out Kron Gracie, the son of Rickson Gracie, who made his UFC debut very recently and got a submission victory. Youssef wants to test himself against that caliber of grappler, and I don't blame him. But it's also really interesting to see that he wants that test that early. He proclaimed that when he beat Shayman Moraes, it's because he, wanted to prove himself against a world-class striker, and now he wants to prove himself against a world-class grappler. So it'll be interesting to see if the UFC books that moving forward. As for Shayman Moraes, this is his first loss after coming off 2 consecutive wins. So he's in good shape for the most part. Obviously you never want to lose a fight in the UFC, but at the same time too, it's not a terrible skid. He's still a very, very talented fighter. So we'll see how he gets booked moving forward with the UFC. I still think he's got some potential to move up in the rankings and possibly put himself in the position to contend for the belt. So we'll see about that. Couple more notes. Desmond Green got a big victory in the prelims, defeating tough veteran, Ultimate Fighter veteran that is, Ross Pearson. Marina Rodriguez scored a unanimous decision victory over Jessica Aguilar, the former WSOF champ. And the return of Ray Borg, the former flyweight championship contender, losing to Casey Kenny by decision. Those are some solid fights. Again, prospects getting their shine against veterans, all coming through with flying colors. So I think overall the card is about a C plus, maybe a B minus. It is a very another regional UFC card, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. I love these cards are necessary because you got to develop these young kids and potential contenders. You gotta string them along. You gotta put them in cards, but you can't just put them on super big spots on pay-per-views and stuff. You gotta have them on main cards of events like this that give them that taste of the big spotlight. The card, like I said, I gave a B plus primarily because of how it finished. So, the 3 consecutive finishes and the 2 knockout of the years that happened. It is interesting. The fickleness of the MMA bubble is that when a card like this happens, everyone always knocks on it, but then they'll say, well, it's a crappy card outside the main event. And it's like, but that's kind of the point, right? The point is, when you watch a card like this that usually does feature a lot of no names and prospects, it's supposed to be made or broken by how the main event turns out, or at least the main featured bouts do. And I think from that perspective, it delivered, because if every fight was a great fight, then this would be an A plus card. It would be a pay-per-view worthy card to a certain extent. But as long as the main event delivers, that's all I expect. And that's exactly what's been happening these last couple of cards in Nashville and London, and where, the prelims in the middle of the card were a little mediocre to middling, but yet the main event would all deliver. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson against Anthony Pettis with the Showtime flying Superman punch, and then in London you had Jorge Masvidal knocking out Darren Till. So, these cards, say what you will about them, they're delivering at the right spots you want them to deliver. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's all you can ask for, right? So that's it for now, guys. Thanks for tuning in as always. I always appreciate it. Have a good night.